My name is Alice Flores, and I was 34 years old when my father wished, out loud, in front of our entire family, that my sister had been their only child. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't even argue. Growing up, I learned early that love in our house wasn't shared, it was ranked. My younger sister, Vanessa, was always first. She had a way of entering a room and becoming its center without trying. Straight A's, debate trophies, effortless charm. Our parents, Richard and Margaret, praised her as if she were a miracle they had personally handcrafted. If I was in the room, it was usually by accident. When Vanessa smiled, they beamed. When she spoke, they listened. When she failed, they softened. When I succeeded, they nodded, politely, distantly, as if my achievements were footnotes in the story they actually cared about. There are moments from childhood that still ache in ways time hasn't dulled. I remember winning a regional math competition at 16. I stood on the stage, scanning the crowd, clutching my certificate, heart pounding. They never came. That same night, they were front row at Vanessa's recital, applauding like proud patrons. That pattern followed us into adulthood. By my late 20s, our parents' clothing and accessories store in Chicago was barely surviving. It looked charming from the outside, warm lights, neatly arranged displays, but behind the scenes, it was chaos. Poor inventory choices, late supplier payments, tax issues they didn't fully understand. I did. I was a financial manager by then, trained, meticulous, painfully responsible. So I stepped in, not once, not as a favor, every single month. $600 left my account like clockwork. I reworked their budgets, renegotiated supplier contracts, corrected bookkeeping errors that could have shut them down. I spent nights hunched over spreadsheets in my apartment while they slept peacefully, convinced everything would somehow work out. Did they thank me? No. They praised Vanessa, her ideas, her vision, her natural business instincts. When I suggested upgrading their accounting software, they brushed it off, until months later when Vanessa mentioned the same thing. Suddenly, it was brilliant. I wasn't naive. I knew why they relied on me. Not because they valued me, but because I was useful. Still, I kept helping. I told myself it was family, that one day they'd see me, that one day it would finally be enough. The night of their 35th anniversary dinner, I still believed that lie. The restaurant was loud with laughter and clinking glasses. Relatives filled the long table, dressed in their best, buzzing with stories. Vanessa sat glowing at the center, soaking up compliments about her promotion in retail. "She's already a regional manager," a cousin said admiringly. "You've always had a gift for business," my mother added proudly. My father nodded, chest puffed out, as if Vanessa's success were his personal achievement. No one mentioned me. Not the years I'd kept their store afloat, not the money, not the nights I lost sleep fixing their mistakes. I sat there, invisible, fingers folded tightly around my napkin. When I finally spoke, I chose my words carefully. "I've been reviewing the store's numbers," I said calmly. "Your overstock is costing you a lot. If you streamline inventory and cut a few suppliers, you could save thousands a year." The table went quiet, but not respectfully. Vanessa's lips curled into a smirk. "Inventory," she laughed. "That's adorable. Maybe stick to your spreadsheets." A few cousins chuckled. My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Let's not bore everyone with numbers, sweetheart. Vanessa's planning a big summer sale." My father didn't even look at me. I tried once more, voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. "I can also renegotiate vendor terms. It would make a real difference." Vanessa laughed again, sharper this time. "I'll handle that." And just like that, I was dismissed. Then my father stood up, lifting his glass for a toast. The room quieted. He looked around the table, smiling, first at Vanessa, then at me. "To 35 years of love and family," he said, "to our pride and joy. Honestly, we wish Vanessa were our only child." The words landed like a slap. Forks froze midair. Someone gasped. My mother said nothing, just sipped her wine as if he'd commented on the weather. Vanessa met my eyes and smiled. I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I pushed my chair back. The scrape echoed in the silence. "Enjoy your night," I said quietly. And I walked out, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor, each step sealing a decision I'd been avoiding for years. That was the moment I stopped being their afterthought. That was the night I stopped holding them together. And that was when everything began to fall apart. I didn't sleep that night. I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights of Chicago bleeding through the blinds, replaying my father's words again and again, like a bruise that deepened every time I touched it. We wish Vanessa were our only child. Not we didn't mean it. Not we're sorry. Just silence, acceptance, confirmation. By dawn, something inside me had settled, not into anger, but into clarity. I opened my banking app first. $600. The automatic transfer that had been leaving my account every month for years, quietly keeping my parents' store alive. I canceled it without hesitation. No dramatic pause, no second guessing, just a clean, final tap. Then I opened our family group chat. "Alice, I'm done helping with the store. No more money, no more financial guidance. I wish you luck." I stared at the message for a long second before hitting send. The chaos arrived exactly 6 minutes later. My phone lit up like a warning signal. First my father, calling, not texting. I let it ring. Then my mother's message appeared, already tinged with panic. "What is this about? You can't just say something like that." Vanessa followed with a single word. "Really?" I set my phone face down on the coffee table and turned on the television. Not to watch anything, just to fill the silence with noise that wasn't them. By morning, the tone had shifted. My father left 4 voicemails. The first was confused, the second irritated. By the 4th, his voice was tight and sharp. "You're hurting the family," he said, as if I were the one pulling the knife. My mother sent a long email about legacy, about sacrifice, about how I was being emotional and unfair over one comment taken out of context. Vanessa called twice. When I didn't answer, she texted in all caps, "Stop overreacting." I deleted it. For the first time in my life, I didn't explain myself. I didn't soften my boundaries. I didn't rush in to fix the mess before it spilled. And that terrified them. Without my money, invoices went unpaid. Without my guidance, supplier emails piled up unanswered. The tax issue I had warned them about, one I'd quietly kept at bay for years, came roaring back. They felt it immediately. 3 days later, Vanessa escalated. I woke up to messages from cousins and distant relatives asking if I was okay. Confused, I opened Facebook. Vanessa hadn't tagged me, but she didn't need to. "Some people think they're indispensable," her post read. "But really, they're just jealous and petty, stirring drama to feel important." The comments rolled in fast. "Family should stick together. Sad when insecurity turns into sabotage." My chest tightened, but I didn't respond. That wasn't enough for her. The next post was crueler. Personal. "Hard to keep a relationship when you're married to your spreadsheets," she wrote. "Some people choose work over love, then blame everyone else when they're alone." It was a lie, a calculated one. Every notification felt like a jab, mocking my career, my life, my choices. For a moment, I considered fighting back, posting screenshots, exposing the transfers, revealing who had really kept the store alive. But then I realized something. Responding would mean I was still playing my role, so I blocked her, muted my parents, and walked away. The silence that followed was unsettling. But underneath it, there was something else. Relief, space, a strange, unfamiliar sense of power. They had built their world on my labor and my silence. Now they had neither. And while they scrambled to patch the cracks, I booked a one-way flight to Florida to see the one person who had always seen through them. My grandfather. I wasn't running. I was choosing where the truth would finally be heard. The decision to fly to Florida wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. I ignored the unread messages from my parents and the missed calls from unknown numbers I knew belonged to them. I didn't open Vanessa's profile again. I didn't need to. I already knew what she'd say, what she always said when control slipped from her hands. I needed someone who would listen without rewriting my words to protect their pride. That person was my grandfather. The flight from Chicago to Tampa took just over 3 hours, long enough for memories to surface in quiet, uncomfortable waves. I thought about how my grandfather, Walter, had always been different, quiet, observant, a man who believed actions mattered more than performance. He'd never favored Vanessa's charm or my silence. He'd simply watched. When I pulled up to his modest beachfront home, he was already on the porch, hands resting on the railing, eyes narrowed slightly as if he'd been expecting a storm. "You don't come all this way unless something's wrong," he said gently as I stepped out of the car. That was all it took. Inside, the ceiling fan hummed steadily as I told him everything, starting with the anniversary dinner. My father's toast, my mother's silence, Vanessa's smile, the years of being overlooked, dismissed, used. I showed him the numbers, the transfers, the emails, the hours of unpaid work. When I pulled out my phone and scrolled through screenshots of Vanessa's posts, his jaw tightened. His hands that had built homes from nothing, curled into fists. "They said that in public?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. "That's not family," he said quietly. "That's betrayal." I knew my grandfather had money, real money, property, land, assets he'd planned to divide evenly among his children and eventually among the grandchildren. He'd always spoken about fairness like it was a rule, not a preference. Now he stood and paced the room. "I hoped they'd grow out of this," he said finally. "I hoped you'd be treated better." He stopped in front of me. "I'm changing my will." I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I didn't need to. That afternoon, his attorney arrived. Papers were spread across the dining table while I sat silently, heart pounding, not with greed, but with something far heavier. Validation. My parents, Vanessa, removed. Everything, land, properties, assets, redirected. Some to charity, the rest to me. "You earned this for who you are," my grandfather said firmly, "not for what you gave them." For the first time in years, I felt seen. Before I left, he asked one last question. "What happens to the store without you?" I answered honestly. "They won't survive." He nodded once. "Then let them face it." I flew back to Chicago the next morning, lighter than I'd felt in decades. I didn't call my parents. I didn't mourn Vanessa. I simply let go. And without me, the clock started ticking. 6 months. That was all it took for everything they'd built on my silence to collapse. I didn't hear about it from my parents. They never reached out, not to apologize, not to explain, not even to ask for help once the reality became impossible to hide. I heard it from a cousin. Her message was short, almost hesitant. The store closed. I stared at the words for a long time, waiting to feel something dramatic. Triumph, guilt, satisfaction. What I felt instead was a quiet, unsurprised stillness. Without my monthly transfers, suppliers had cut them off one by one. The invoices I used to quietly cover piled up. The tax issue I had warned them about for years finally triggered an audit. Penalties stacked fast, thousands of dollars they didn't have. My father tried to negotiate. He always believed charm could replace preparation. The IRS didn't agree. The bank foreclosed on the store 2 weeks later. Vanessa's world followed closely behind. Her confident posts disappeared almost overnight. The ambitious expansion plans she'd bragged about suddenly had no foundation. Investors backed out the moment they realized the store was gone. Her experience didn't hold up under scrutiny when there was no business left to showcase. Then something unexpected happened. People started asking questions. A distant aunt commented under one of Vanessa's old posts, wondering aloud how the store had stayed afloat for so long, despite its poor numbers. A cousin shared screenshots, bank transfers, my name, my amounts, every single month. $600. The truth spread faster than the lies ever had. Vanessa tried to explain it away, claimed I'd offered, claimed I'd exaggerated my role. But no one was listening anymore. The comments turned cold. Friends unfollowed. Coworkers whispered. The golden image cracked, and once it did, it shattered. My parents weren't spared either. Without store income, the second mortgage they'd taken out quietly, assuming I'd always be there to fill the gaps, became impossible to pay. The house they'd lived in for decades was seized. They moved into a small apartment, boxes stacked against the walls like evidence. Relatives who once applauded my father's anniversary toast stopped inviting them to gatherings. An uncle confronted him at a barbecue. "You pushed her away," he said bluntly. "For what?" My mother tried to play the victim, said I'd abandoned them, but the receipts spoke louder than her tears. My grandfather didn't waver. He finalized the will and sent me a handwritten note. "It's done. They received nothing." I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. They had built their lives on comparison, favoritism, and entitlement. When the illusion disappeared, there was nothing underneath to hold them up. And for the first time, their downfall wasn't my responsibility. After the store collapsed, people expected me to react. Some waited for anger. Others expected celebration. A few braced themselves for a dramatic confrontation. I gave them none of it. I stayed quiet, not out of fear, but because silence no longer felt like surrender. It felt like choice. Work became my anchor. Without the constant drain of rescuing my parents' mistakes, my focus sharpened. I threw myself into projects that had once felt secondary to family emergencies. Late nights at the office no longer carried resentment, only purpose. A tech startup I'd been advising casually asked me to take on a larger role. I streamlined their finances, renegotiated contracts, and helped secure a multi-million-dollar deal that stabilized their future. When my director called me into her office weeks later, she smiled in a way that told me everything before she spoke. "You're ready for senior management," she said, "and you earned it." For the first time, my success belonged to me alone. Outside of work, my life slowly filled with people who didn't demand pieces of me just to tolerate my presence. My best friend Emily remained constant, never pushing me to forgive, never asking me to explain myself. She understood that walking away wasn't cruelty. It was survival. Then there was Ethan. I met him at a networking event neither of us wanted to attend. He was a structural engineer with a dry sense of humor and a calm confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Our first date was simple: coffee, conversation, quiet laughter. No pressure, no performance. When I eventually told him about my family, he didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions. He just listened, his hand steady over mine. "They don't define you," he said softly. "They never did." It was the first time someone said it like a fact, not encouragement. I built a small, solid world, one made of trust, laughter, and boundaries that didn't need defending. My apartment, once filled with anxiety and late-night calculations, became a place of rest. Emily's texts, Ethan's laughter, mornings that didn't begin with guilt. I heard updates occasionally, through cousins, through whispers. Vanessa bounced between jobs. My mother sold jewelry online. My father took warehouse shifts he never talked about. They never apologized, and I no longer needed them to. The lesson came slowly, but it settled deep. Love that requires you to disappear is not love. Family that only values what you provide is not family. I had spent years trying to earn respect by giving more money, more time, more silence. Walking away didn't make me cruel. It made me whole. I didn't ruin their lives. I stopped holding them together. And when I finally chose myself, I discovered something simple and powerful. I was never the problem. I was the solution they didn't deserve.